Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Youth Threads podcast. I am your host, Zane Miller, and today we are going to be talking about a topic that, is very important to me. And we're going to be talking about the impacts of toxic home environments and bad home environments on young people. And we're going to be talking about addressing the root causes of those issues rather than, the way that society tries to handle it. Do you want to introduce yourself?
I am Bailey McCoy. I am a member of National Youth Rights Association, and I will be talking about the topic we are discussing today.
So I know we've done a few of these in the past where you've talked about your own story directly, and a lot of it has kind of coincided. But do you want to just kind of give a brief introduction of what you personally went through and why this topic is so important to you?
Yes. So when I was a minor, I was navigating toxic home environments a lot. Before I was 15 and a half, like when I was 13 through 15 and a half, I was in a home environment with my mom, stepdad, and my two younger siblings. My mom and stepdad were doing domestic violence due to drug use. And my younger siblings, I was always trying to make sure they were okay, always looking out for them, always navigating all of that. And then after so much bad stuff happened, after it got too bad and out of hand, foster care got involved and I was taken into foster care. And then I eventually got stable at my sister and her dad and stepmom's house, and they were my foster parents. And my sister is my younger sister, and I was with her dad and stepmom. The problem is that they were not supportive of me. They were not respectful to me. They did not treat me well. And then that was causing me to have a lot of issues on top of what I was already dealing with. And then eventually they put me on a 14-day notice and kicked me out. And my social worker sent me to a group home 8 or 9 hours away in Los Angeles. And after that, when I was at the group home, I was getting physically assaulted, and that happened 3 different times by 3 different girls. And then when I was done in the group home in July 2024, I was sent all the way back to my sister and her dad and stepmom's house and spent my senior year there. And then I was not doing good. I was on mental health medications and was labeled with mental health diagnoses. But then after I turned 18 and graduated high school in June 2025 and went out on my own and started living my own life, I was feeling so much better, so much more at peace. And I had been able to taper off of all 3 medications. And currently, I do not take any mental health medications. I do not see a psychiatrist or a therapist. And I'm doing great because I'm out of those toxic home environments.
Yeah, and that kind of goes into the main point that we've made in other episodes before about the best thing for people that are living in these toxic home environments is to kind of address the root of the problem, is to take the people out of the home environments, is to fix the problem instead of treating the young people like they're the problems to be fixed. And I feel like that's what happens a lot, is a lot of mental health professionals is they will look at the young people as the problems to be fixed themselves, and they'll just throw medications and throw all these things at them, being like, okay, this will fix you. But in a lot of the circumstances, they are not the problem that needs to be fixed. It's the environment itself that needs to be fixed. And that is a more difficult way to look at it because, a therapist themselves or a psychiatrist can't necessarily fix the home environment that the young person is growing up in. But I feel like a good step to that is recognizing the fact that we can't treat these young people like they need to just be medicated until that they feel better, when realistically all of the problems that are happening to young people in situations like yours are because of the environment that they're living in, and we need to focus on creating systems to better protect young people from these toxic home environments.
Exactly, and I totally agree with you. And for example, I was labeled with oppositional defiance disorder, which in my honest opinion, that's just the system's way of saying that you question them and advocate for yourself and won't just let them hurt you and take advantage of you without saying a word or questioning it.
Mm-hmm. For sure. I would 100% agree with that. I feel like that's kind of a made up issue. It's just saying that you don't want to follow like rules and stuff like that, but when it gets down to it, what are the rules that you don't want to follow? What are the things that you're being defiant of? They don't really look at that. Like, so you can be in a
Right.
system like a foster care system or a family system where you don't want to follow what they're mandating of you, but they don't actually look at what they're trying to force you to do. And that's something that happened to me in my life a lot, and I'll go into that a bit later. But I do want to ask you, what would be like the main, like, what was like the most memorable like things that happened, like like parts of your toxic home environment that you think stuck with you the most, and like what would be like those most memorable stories that you think would be good to just kind of get out there and just let people know?
Yeah. So, for example, my mom was constantly like, she was constantly verbally and emotionally abusive. She yelled and cursed very frequently. And additionally, I remember when I lived there and I was always looking out for my younger siblings, there were times where my stepdad would be out of town working because he worked for a roofing company. And so he'd often have out of town jobs to go attend to. And when he would be doing that, my mom would very frequently leave the house and I would be home alone with my two younger siblings. And she'd often be gone for anywhere from 2 hours to 8 or 9 hours. And sometimes she'd do it without saying nothing before leaving. And other times she'd be impossible to get a hold of. And I'd just be left home with my two younger siblings.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that kind of, puts a lot of burden, a lot of stress on you, I bet, because, you kind of felt like you had to be in the position of taking care of your siblings while your mom was just off doing whatever she wanted to do.
Another thing I remember is that because of how bad things were, my mental health got so bad to the point where I had done multiple suicide attempts. And one time when I did one of my suicide attempts, there were times where like I had ended up in the mental hospital and had ended up being put on 5150 holds. And what I noticed is that oftentimes when I would be in the mental hospital, even after the 5150 hold was up and over, like the time was up, my mom, at that point, she has the legal ability to either have me stay in the mental hospital for longer or to come pick me up. And I remember I would be frequently like begging her to come pick me up. And she would tell me that I need to stay in there for longer and get the help that I need and everything like that. And also, when I would do the suicide attempts, I remember she would flip out on me when I would do them and like yell and curse at me after I had done them.
Yeah, no, that's definitely awful. Do you feel like when you were in the mental hospital, do you feel like they did anything to like help you, or do you feel like being in that situation made your mental health worse?
I felt like it made my mental health worse. Like being in the mental hospital did not make anything better. It felt like I was literally isolated because in the mental hospital, they take my phone, they take most, if not all, of my belongings. Sometimes, depending on my clothes, like if they had strings or something, they would make me change into alternative clothes. And it felt isolating, and other kids in there would be having a lot of behavioral and issues and stuff like that. And it just felt like I was not getting actual help, but just being trapped.
Yeah, for sure. It's interesting because every single person that I've ever talked to who has had an experience in a mental hospital, the stories are exactly the same. It's always exactly what you were describing. It's always that everything they have is taken from them. All of their property, all of their belongings. It feels like dehumanizing. It feels like you're being treated as like a subject. And then they get placed in situations a lot of times that are a lot worse. One of my friends, for example, she told me this story where she was having a panic attack, not even like a suicidal ideation thing, but she was just having like a panic attack, and her mom freaked out and drove her to a mental hospital and tried to get her committed into a mental hospital because of the fact she was having like an anxiety attack. And it's exactly what you said happened to you. Her belongings and everything was taken from her. And then she said she was like put in a room where she had to wait for multiple hours before she could even speak to like a mental health professional, where she was just sitting there with like other people who were having like genuine breakdowns that were like literally on the verge of killing themselves. And that made her feel like, especially because she had an anxiety disorder, that's why she was having the panic attacks, she felt that she was like trapped. It was worse. The situation made her more stressed out, like, and she felt like she came out of it feeling that it didn't do anything for her, and instead it just worsened the root of the problems. So I feel like a lot of the times what these places they try to do is they try to strip people of control over their lives because they try to like control variables. They're like, okay, this person's life, we don't know what their issue is. We're just going to take everything, control every aspect of their life, because if we control every aspect of their life, then hopefully we're eliminating the source of whatever is making them, in the mindset that they currently are. But what they're not realizing is when you take a young person that's already having a mental health crisis and you take away all their belongings, take away their phone, take away their ability to like contact their like support system, like their friends and stuff like that, and then put them in a room and put them in places with other people who are going through even worse issues, that's just going to make them feel dehumanized. It's going to make them feel isolated, and it's not going to help any of the issues. So I feel like one of the biggest things that we need to do is we need to address how these mental health places take youth mental health crises, and we need to make it towards an actually productive way of addressing it rather than just trying to exert this control over young people's lives.
Yes, I completely agree with you. And what's also another major negative effect of being in these mental hospitals is that when you're in these mental hospitals, you basically cannot attend school to stay caught up on your schoolwork. And by the time you return to school, it's a whole nother battle you have to do with getting all that work you missed out on excused, which some education systems, you're just not going to have luck at that.
For sure. I there was we did a podcast last week about the importance of self-directed education, and one of the big things that people brought up with, the issues of the traditional schooling system is that there's so little room for error, there's little room for absence. There's certain schools where if you miss more than 2 days in a month, you're considered a chronic absentee. My school system, personally, the high school that I went to, if you had over 9 absences in a semester, they started requiring you to take extra classes outside of school or outside of school hours to make that up, or else you wouldn't be able to graduate. Even if you had a good grade, like even if you passed the class with a 100, if you were absent for more than 9 days during the semester, you had to take extra hours to make up for, which I just think is ridiculous. If I show up like half the days, but I show up just enough to be able to pass the class, like why does it matter how much I was there? Like that's such a non-issue, So I feel like with the mental, that's a really good point you bring up actually, because what these mental hospitals do is they put youth in a situation where now they have to not just deal with their own mental struggles, they're having to deal with the new burdens that are being placed on them by the hospital itself, which is, all the situations we just discussed. And then on top of that, the burdens that are being placed on them afterwards, which is, like all of the issues with schooling and stuff. So then they'll have to fight through, missing all of the schoolwork and then other stuff with like the absences that I was talking about, where these policies are just very unfair towards youth, especially towards youth with mental struggles. So it really just creates this cycle of burdening young people and making it to where one mental health issue can just sort of ruin their lives. And a lot of the times, when these mental health issues are based on aspects of their environment that they can't control, then they're just getting screwed over in every single aspect, and they really have no control over their lives. And that's what I think is, it connects all of these issues together of just kind of how young people are such in a situation where they lose this autonomy over their lives and they get in a cycle of just everything working against them.
Yes, exactly. And what's also very frustrating about it too is that when you're in the mental hospital and like when you're getting discharged and everything, what they'll do most of the time is they will make you sit there and create like what they call a safety plan, and they'll like ask you all these questions and make you tell them all these things, and they say it's to make sure you don't do it again, but then it's like to make sure I don't do it again, you need to address the actual root cause of why this happened in the first place. A safety plan, which is what you're calling it, is just a band-aid for everything else.
When you were in the mental health hospital, did you tell them that the source of your suicidal ideation was the toxic home environment you were growing up in?
I do know that they knew that I was struggling a lot at home, and that I was dealing with a lot and going through a lot at home. And like, same thing when I was in the foster care system as well. They knew that I was very unhappy with my sister and her dad and stepmom and living there, and that I was not supported or loved there. And like, for example, in foster care, I had specifically only done one suicide attempt versus before foster care I had done multiple, but that one I did in foster care was in December 2024, which was during my senior year. And what happened was I was at my sister and her dad and stepmom's, as we know, and I was just the weight was too heavy and I just couldn't keep dealing with it, and I felt like I was barely breathing every day. And then I had missed out on the finals of my school for that first semester because I was in the hospital during finals week for that semester, and then I even was in the hospital for part of Christmas break, including Christmas Day. And luckily, when I had gotten back to school after Christmas break was over, luckily I was able to make up my finals, and I didn't even really have a lot to make up, but it was still very difficult, and just being in the mental hospital even then was just not enjoyable. It did not help me. And after that hospital stay, I had a CFT meeting, which is a child family team meeting. It's like one of those meetings where like the child and the family and the foster care team have a meeting and discuss certain things. And during that meeting, I had mentioned the reason why I had that crisis was because of the toxic home environment I'm in, and that I am not happy or supported at my sister's stepmom's house. And I told them that I need to be moved to a different placement. And what they had told me is that there are no other local placements available, and that even just to move me, we would have to at least move me out of the area, which they were saying would negatively impact my education.
When you were in the mental health hospital and working with these, these systems in the foster care and any of this, I know that you said that one of the things the mental hospital did was a safety plan where, they like trying to, where the goal was to try to prevent you from having another crisis like this in the future. Did anything in the safety plan involve like any of the mental health professionals or anybody involved like checking up on your home and like dragging your parents into it and trying to fix the issues that they were causing?
Nope, none of it did. The safety plan mainly consisted of them asking me like certain questions, like informational questions, and then asking me, from what I remember, most of the time it was them asking me like to say and talk about 3 coping skills that I will use if I start feeling any type of way. And that's not helping me. That's not addressing the root cause.
Yeah, and I feel like that goes back to exactly what I was saying earlier about how these systems, they try to treat the young people like they themselves are the problem to be fixed. They'll be like, okay, you are the problem for having this crisis. Here's how you can fix your problem. When I would say at least from observed experience of what I've known from what people have told me, a good 75% of the time, the crisis that people are going with always has a root cause in the home environment, and then 90% of the time in those circumstances it's with their parents or with some form of authority within the home that is being oppressive, being abusive, being overbearing, or just not being supportive to their needs. And especially people that are sensitive to mental health crises, like people who may
Yes.
like have anxiety and stuff like that. It really not being supported really can just sort of have such a negative impact on their lives. But then, yeah, what I feel like from everything you've been telling me is that they're just kind of treating it like it's up to you, like it's on you to fix the situation that you're in, when you don't have the power to do that.
Yeah.
You don't have that control over your own life, and young people in general don't have the control over their own lives to be able to do that, because like young people don't even
Right.
have,
Yeah.
like, young people don't even have the legal ability to like leave their home, basically. Like runaway rights. Like young people can't, if a young person runs away from home, like they can just be arrested and picked up by the police and then forced to go back with the home. And like young people aren't allowed to use Uber, so they can't like call a ride to pick them up. Like there's driving age laws, which makes it to where like young people, like a lot of the times it's really hard for them to like, be able to drive independently. And then also that's like a huge financial burden if their parents don't want to get them like a car or whatever that they can just use, because you're lucky if you have that. And then like young people aren't allowed to book rooms at hotels. So it's like, and if a young person is in a is in a bad home environment, where like what are they supposed to do? Like they have no control over their environment because of the fact that parents have an overbearing control legally over their kids. And like young people don't even really
Yes.
have that authority to be able to do anything about it. Like a parent can do whatever they want to a kid, and like 9 times out of 10, what their stuff that they're doing really isn't considered child abuse. I mean, in your cases with the domestic violence and drug abuse, that was definitely abusive, and it's sad that they took as long as they did to be able to intervene. But that's a good example of just saying like even when it is as bad as your situation, like child protective services takes so long to intervene that you had to have multiple suicide attempts before they even did anything about it. So it's like young people are just in this perpetual
Yeah.
cycle of being stuck.
And when foster care finally took me in, it wasn't even because of one of my attempts. It was because my mom had gotten arrested in one of the domestic violence incidents. And at that point, my stepdad was at his mom's house. And so it was me and one of my mom's friends at the home. And that's when CPS finally took me in. And from what I recall, there were also multiple unfounded CPS investigations prior to all of that.
Like CPS investigations into your home life that they just chose not to go anywhere with.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
And
Like they had multiple unfounded CPS investigations where they did not find sufficient reasoning to get involved any further.
and this is after you've had suicide attempts.
Yeah, and the only time that they actually took me in to foster care is when my mom had gotten arrested, and it was just me and one of my mom's friends at home, and that's when they finally took me in. It took my mom getting arrested.
Wow. You know, your story is such a powerful example of how I feel like systems have failed young people in the way that they prioritize this parental control so heavily. Like in our society, they do. They prioritize that, like, young people are basically, like, I would say they treat them like property of their parents in the way that they prioritize this parental control in all circumstances. Like when I was doing research into CPS, it says that every single time the policy of them is to reunify the young person with their parents, it like if possible, and that's what they're mainly trying to do. And the issue with that is that they've done this in circumstances of abuse, and there's been so many instances, and I wrote a whole webpage about that. I'll link in the description. There's been so many instances where either there was the CPS started an investigation into an abusive case, and then they decided to not go through with it, and the child either ended up severely injured or dead, and more circumstances where they started an investigation into an abusive circumstance. They determined that there was abuse. This is important. They determined that there was abuse, removed the child from the home, and then took the child back to the home, reunified them when they felt it was safe. And then the child ended up getting severely injured or killed at the hands of the parents. And this has happened on multiple occasions. It's just ridiculous how they try to prioritize this parental control and this parental, I would say, ownership of young people. And it becomes such a major issue that they feel like abusers can be rehabilitated into not being abusers. But in my opinion, if someone is an abuser once, they are always an abuser in my eyes. And even if they say they'll change, even if they go through their classes or they go through anything like that, they're still that person on the inside. That's still who they were. Like I'm the type of person that if I had a kid, I would never abuse my kid. and that's just who I am as a person. And if you're the type of person to where you abuse your kid, that's just who you are. And along with that, a lot of it is substance related. It's either
Yeah.
it's alcohol or drugs. I mean, I know you mentioned that a lot of the domestic violence in your house was fueled by drugs. And that's the same thing. Drug addicts, a lot of the times addicts are addicts. Some people, when they get on these substances like drugs and alcohol, it turns them violent and it makes it to where they will be a threat to others, especially to the people in their household and especially towards children, because children are vulnerable and they can get away with it. And they've been able to get away with it because these systems prioritizes family control. And the point that I'm trying to make about this, you can't really fix these situations with these parents. You have to figure out, there has to be some sort of system of getting young people into a place that's safe while not prioritizing this family control, because the only way to fix these issues that these young people are going with, and it's not to medicate them, it's not to throw them in mental institutions, it's to fix the root of the issue, being the toxic family in the toxic living environment and the parents that are causing these problems.
As you were mentioning about like substance abuse and how that causes a lot of parents to be like violent and stuff like that, I have an example like from one of my friends who is currently 16 but was like 14, 15 while I was their friend. And what basically had happened was they had told me that their mom had gotten drunk and basically got into a physical fight with the stepdad and tried to choke the stepdad.
Wow.
And my friend had told me that they screamed and almost lost their voice. And when they were telling me about it, they said, so the demons almost possessed my mom again, so that's great. And that just broke my heart. I was like, you should not be having to deal with this. This is unacceptable. And my friend had specifically said that they're used to it and that it's okay and that they'll get over it because their mom was just drunk and they love their mom. And I'm like, this is not okay. This is not normal.
Yeah, for sure. And it's sad how much growing up in a circumstance like that, weighs on someone, because it makes them think, growing up in something like that, it makes them think that that's normal and that's just what they should have to deal with. And it's really sad because of the fact that when parents get drunk or they do drugs, they get into any of these substances when they have children, and it puts them in a circumstance where they're not really entirely in control of their actions. Their impulse control is all out of whack. They can act violent, they can act crazy. And it's really, really bad because they don't have that control over themselves that they normally would. And it's so bad for young people.
Exactly.
And it's so bad for young people to have to live in that. It's terrible because you don't know what to expect. Even if your parents are kind of abusive, but if they're not on alcohol and stuff, you know what to expect. But with alcohol, when you get these substances in there, you never know what to expect from them because of the fact that their impulses aren't controlled. They're like animals. And I want to say that they are like animals because that's what alcohol and drugs do to someone. And in my opinion, this is controversial, but I don't feel like I'm very anti-alcohol in general, and I don't feel like anyone who's a parent especially should even be allowed to drink alcohol, but that's my opinion on the matter. But a lot of this stemmed from my life growing up, going back to topic of toxic home environments, because I grew up in one myself where my stepdad and mom were both drinkers, not like super heavy drinkers. Most of the time it wasn't bad, but they were that type of social drinker to where anytime they had friends over, they just got wasted. And I have a vivid memory of when I was 10 years old. My stepdad had gotten so drunk that he was basically like a zombie. You didn't know what to expect from him. He was and then he was yelling, screaming, just being unpredictable, dropping things, banging into walls. I was scared. As a 10-year-old, I was scared. So I didn't have a lock on my door. I didn't know what he would do because he was unpredictable and he seemed a little violent and a little dangerous. So I took this motion detector that was given to me as a birthday present that I like built with like my uncle's like a birthday present. And I shut my door and I literally and it would like beep if there's motion near it. So I put this motion detector like outside of my door because I was afraid, and this was the thought process. I remember my thought process as a 10-year-old. I was afraid that my stepdad would come and barge in my door and like attack me or like drag me out of bed or just do something unpredictable. So I literally put down a motion detector for it. So if he came in the middle of the night, it would like beep and wake me up. So I would like be able to prepare. That was literally my thought process as a 10-year-old because I didn't know what would happen. And it's like, no kid should have to go through that. No kid should have to worry that a person who's in like a parental authority of them is going to like attack them in a drunken, unpredictable rage. Like nobody should have to go through that. And that's the thing about when you
Exactly.
yeah, and that's the thing about when you go back to the toxic home environments of these things last. Like if a kid has like a mental health problem, a lot of the time it's because they're growing up in a situation like this. They're growing up with, if you constantly don't feel safe, like your cortisol's through the roof, you get stressed out. When you get stressed out, you feel physically sick. You feel like crap. And then it just may and then if you have anxiety, it's gonna like all everything just compounds on each other. And then when you go to a mental health hospital or something, they treat you like you're the problem. They try to medicate you, they try to diagnose you with oppositional defiant disorder or something weird like that, and then just send you back to the toxic home environment they rarely ever try to actually address the source of the problem, which is the environment that the young person is living in.
Exactly. And like I also remember when I was still a minor, especially during my senior year, when I was living with my sister and her dad and stepmom and everything, what I noticed is that at school, I felt more supported and loved and cared for at school than I did at home. I felt more safe and supported at school than home. And I also like just felt like school was more enjoyable and like happy and supportive than home. And I also felt like I was treated more like a human at school than at home or a psychiatrist's office or whatever. And I specifically remember everything I was going through at home caused me to struggle, especially emotionally at school. Like it leaked into my school day. And I remember the school staff being so supportive of me, always being there for me, always accommodating me as needed. They even went as far as letting me vent to them when I had too much on my mind to focus because they saw that I was in distress and needed support, not punishment. And I remember specifically running off of campus at least 2 or 3 times when I got frustrated or overwhelmed or just couldn't handle things anymore. And I kid you not, during my senior year, despite all of that, they never even handed me a lunch detention or suspension, which is even more proof that they understood what I was going through. And I felt more supported at school than at home.
And that's a really good that's like a really good like positive example of that. There's a lot of school systems that aren't really supportive of that, so it's really good that you were able to have that. And and that's the thing about that. Sometimes the support systems that young people have, just that they have themselves, like their friends or like a teacher or just like somebody that they have in their own life, is going to be like the main person who's like, keeping them going and like helping them. So when these mental hospitals, they drag you in, when you get dragged in there, when they take your phone, they take your ability to contact other people, it's like then you're just stuck there. They cut you off from your support system. And it's weird because the whole thing that they're trying to do is like make it to where you're supported. But then they cut you off from your support system because they're like, oh, if they have their phone, then they could do something that would worsen their mental health. And it's like 99% of the time, if someone's in a mental health hospital or like a mental hospital, they're going to want to have that connection to the people that support them. And they're going to want to talk to them, and they're going to want to feel supported by that because like they don't feel safe. They don't, and like as we discussed about the other stuff of like the mental health hospitals, they feel dehumanizing. They feel isolating. You feel isolated from everybody, and you're in an uncomfortable situation and in a new situation, especially if you already have anxiety or something like that. And then they cut you off from your support system. So they really just do not help young people with what they're going through at all. And a lot of the times they make it worse. But going back to the toxic home environments, this stuff really does stick with people, and I want to talk about a little bit of a personal story with myself, another one, because you know, like I've mentioned some stuff with my stepdad, but even when he wasn't drunk, he was still like, you could not talk to this person without him causing a problem out of it. Like you could not have a conversation with him without him turning it into some reason to like hate you or yell at you or berate you or like. So obviously I wouldn't want to interact with him. Like he'd get home, the garage would open, I'd like would like run away. I'd be like, I'm out. Like I don't want to interact. I don't want to be around him because I didn't feel safe being around him. I felt stressed. Like I felt stressed in even interacting with him. And it sticks because even when I was, away from them, like in my room and stuff, I could still always hear my mom and stepdad arguing, yelling, screaming at each other, like talking crap about me from downstairs when I wasn't even doing anything. I was just like existing, and they were just like talking about, like he was like talking about how I was like the worst person in the world, and I'm just like sitting here, like I'm not even doing anything. And then there's been some times that even since I've been out of that situation, that when I lived in a rental house with my grandma that had a garage, um, it was time that my grandpa came over and he had a garage opener. So the garage would open, and that like immediately sent me back into that same like high cortisol mindset of my stepdad's here. I have to leave. I have to like I got like stressed. I was like, and I had to like leave. I had to like get out, and it immediately sent me into like this kind of like high stress fight or flight type of instinct. And there was another time that my grandma was watching a TV show downstairs, and there was a character that was yelling that sounded like eerily similar to my stepdad, and it gave me that exact same feeling of like feel like it like made me think that I was back where I wasn't safe. So it's like even when young people get out of this, and a lot of times I got out, I ran away, I left home when I was like 16, but a lot of times people don't leave until they're 18 or even later, depending on their personal situations. So think about it, this stuff sticks with young people and it causes like lifelong trauma. And when the mental health institutions that are supposed to be supporting young people are basically just treating them like the problem and throwing them back into the homes where they're not safe, where the environment is the problem and not them, it can just completely screw someone's life over and give them lifelong trauma.
Exactly. And when you mentioned like that you felt uncomfortable even just interacting with or talking to your stepdad, what's kind of interesting about that is that I have a similar experience where like when I was a minor and was dealing with toxic parental figures and home environments and everything, I remember like if I had a question where it was like a kind of question where I'm like, can I do this? Can I do that? Or do you mind this? Or do you mind that? Or whatever. Like if I was asking a question like that, I would be scared to even ask the question because I would be fearful of like what kind of answer they give me or if they give me a whole lecture or whatever.
Mm-hmm. And it's like it's kind of hard when you feel like you can't even talk to someone without them causing an issue over it. Like I remember one instance, and in hindsight this isn't that big of a deal, but it's just this is something that I remember in particular. It's like I bought with my own money, by the way, that I earned from working. I bought like a UFC pay-per-view, and I told it to my mom. I told my mom about it. I was like, "Oh yeah, I'm gonna watch this later," because I was like happy about it. It was like something that I was interested in. I was like happy about. And then my mom immediately told my stepdad about it, and that turned into like a 30-minute thing of like, why the hell are you buying this? You shouldn't do this. This is a waste of your money. Why are you doing this? Like you should only do that if you have a bunch of people coming over. You waste your money. You do this, and it just was like a 30-minute thing of just me having to sit and get berated, and it was like,
Yep.
it was like what? It's like you can't even like you can't do anything around these people. Like, and I know it's like my situation isn't as bad as like what you had to experience, and with that aspect, like I was never physically abused, but when you live in a situation where it's just hostile, it's like you can't be yourself, you can't say what you want to say, you can't talk about what you want to talk about, you can't interact with people like you can normally. You feel like you have to have a guard up. You feel like you have to be on the defense constantly because if you let your guard down, you're going to get attacked verbally,
Yeah.
emotionally, in any regard. And that type of like living in the type of environment just sticks with you because nobody wants to deal with that. Nobody wants to live in a place where they can't be themselves, or they don't feel supported, where they get yelled at or berated or like attacked, or like they're not allowed to even like question things. Like It's
Yeah.
really it's
Like I remember when I was a minor dealing with all of that, like I remember like if I disagreed with something or if I didn't like the idea of something or whatever, and I would question it, I would be told like I don't owe you an explanation, or I would be told don't question me or don't talk back to me. It's like what the heck?
yeah. And it's especially if it's about logical things. It's like having logic and reasoning is such an important skill for young people growing up and developing that. And it's like you can't develop like logic and reasoning if every time you show logic and reasoning that opposes something authority figures say, you just get shut down. Like there was one example where my stepdad was really mad about a situation going on in my life. And I'll eventually do a podcast about my whole story, but there was a situation in my life that I was not causing. And he was upset about it, so he took it out on me and tried to punish me over it. And one of the things he was trying to punish me over was, oh yeah, we're going to shut off the internet at 9 o'clock, so you have to go to bed at 9 o'clock. When I was straight A student in dual credit classes, trying to graduate high school with a college degree. And I'm the type of person where I get home from school, I'm exhausted, I'm going to take a nap, and I'm going to do my homework at like midnight because that's when my brain works the best. And they knew that. They knew that I did that and they knew that it worked. Like, it's not like I'm doing that and then failing my classes. It's like I'm doing that and it's working for me and I'm like succeeding doing that because I understand how my brain works and I understand what like helps me and what doesn't help me. And then when I explained this, I was like, you doing this would actively be hindering my education and my ability to succeed. So, like, don't talk back to me. We're going to do it and you have to deal with it. It was that. It was like, you're punishing me when I didn't. First of all, they were punishing me when I didn't even do anything. And then, second of all, they wouldn't even. When I gave them a logical reasoning as to why it was stupid, they just shut it down. So it's like you can it's like you even if you bring logic, it's like if you're the most rational person there, like you're the one who's being rational, you're the one who's being mature, and then they're the ones acting like a toddler. It's like when young people grow up where they're the most rational people in their home and the people that should be like the ones supporting them and like actively listening to them and understanding their concerns, if they just like sit up on their high horse, like, no, it's wrong because I said so. It's like, how are you supposed to like, how are you supposed to like develop? How are you supposed to learn? How are you supposed to like do normal things? It doesn't make sense like at all.
It's them wanting control and power over you. That's literally what it is.
Yes, it's a power play. They want to like take things that give you joy. Like he would invent problems where there were no problems. So yeah, that's just kind of the thing about it. It's just when someone grows up in a toxic home environment, it just makes them feel like crap. All right. Well, thank you for coming on and everything. This was a good episode. I liked everything we had to talk about, and I really think this is a big issue that people don't recognize is the fact that growing up in a toxic home environment, even if it's not physically abusive, even if it's just like getting emotionally abused, getting like berated and stuff like that, that stuff sticks with people. And mental health institutions and therapists, they don't recognize the source of the problem. They don't recognize that this was the problem is the home, and that needs to be addressed before the kid is treated like an issue. So that's really what I want to
Yes.
the message that I want to leave off on is don't treat the young person like they're the problem. Understand their home environment and treat and tackle the root cause. So, yeah. Thanks for watching everyone and
Yes.
we'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.